Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. This morning, our guest is Lexi Peck, and she is an author. She's got a degree in psychology, and she is a children's author. And this morning, for any parent that is dealing with fear and anxiety in their children, this is a conversation that you absolutely need to connect with so that we can all figure out how to deal with fear properly. Lexi, good morning and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Lexi has written a children's book and it's entitled, What Do You Say to a Dragon? A story about facing fear and anxiety. But before you got here, Lexi, you have children, small children, and you started to begin to understand that there was a fear dynamic happening. Tell us about that.
So I had a fear entering in as a mother around my children, raising them properly, doing the right thing, keeping them safe. All of those things, they didn't create an experience of love that I was expressing. It was an experience of fear that I was living out of. And I didn't realize it until my daughter started getting a little bit older. And instead of her embracing something that was scary and me seeing her internal systems working of how do I feel about this, she looked to me. And if my face was nervous or afraid, then she would get the cues from me instead of from herself. And so I had to acknowledge the fact that a lot of the role that I was hoping not to play for her, which was to project my own fears and insecurities and anxieties onto her, was exactly what I was doing. I had to enter into different perspectives on how to change that dynamic for her so that she could start tapping into her own experience instead of mine.
When did you realize that you were projecting your fears onto her? How did that happen for you?
So when she would be excited about doing something new that made me nervous, I would dampen her experience of wanting to adventure into something new by trying to warn her of all the potential dangers of making it more scary than it needed to be so that I didn't have to experience her suffering or her pain through it. One of the first very obvious ones for me was she was really young when she wanted to learn to ride a bike. And I knew that falling and getting hurt was inevitable, that frustration and just the general experience of learning to ride a bike is difficult, but she was 4 years old and she really wanted to. And so I had to remove myself for a little bit and let my husband help begin the process with her because he has a lot more ability to enter in those spaces and not create anxiety that doesn't need to be there. And he can stay steadfast in the middle of her feeling the range of experience where I was having a hard time doing that. And so when she would want to give up, she was looking to me and looking for me to save her from what it is that she wanted to do. And so that was my first real eye-opening moment of I have produced a relationship between the two of us where she thinks if I'm afraid, mommy's going to save me because she's where my brave comes from. It's not from inside of me. And so I had to physically remove myself, come back into a headspace of it is not a poor mother who allows her kids to struggle into something new and to learn and to experience the feelings of hardship and frustration, but it is actually a good mother who's wanting her children to extend themselves so that they can do for themselves what it is that they will want to do in the future instead of looking to me to extend my brave to them.
And so when you start to look at the genesis of your fear as a parent and not wanting her to experience things that you internalize would be hurtful or dangerous or have some sort of consequence like falling off the bike, do you then go back into your own life as a child and look to your mother to see how that is projected onto you and how then you project it onto the next generation?
Yes. So there there was a lot of freedom I had when I was little. We lived on land and we explored outside on our own a lot. I was climbing trees. I was doing a lot. Parents now tend to be very aware and cautious of like not letting their kids get above a certain height or whatever. I didn't have that, but I did have a fear of leaving the bubble of the safety of my family. And so that is where I felt like if I was separated from my mother, I would not survive. And then I mean that quite literally. I was afraid to go to sleepovers. I was afraid to go to camps. I was afraid to go because I wouldn't be able to get to her. And she was my source of keeping me safe. So I definitely, once I had my own children, when they want to leave me and go somewhere else where I cannot reach them, I'm not the source of their comfort or their safety or whatever. I've had to learn that stems all the way back to when I was little, that I felt such a loss when I wasn't with my mother. And so I've had to acknowledge that, especially with my own.
When were you able to understand that as an adult and work through it? Because obviously, if you were away from her or you perceived that you were going to be away from her, there was anxiety and uncertainty about your survival. When did you pinpoint that as an issue of anxiousness?
So my husband has helped me a lot in experiencing parenting differently, giving a different perspective. And when I would have that response of like, no, we cannot let this happen, or I cannot be less involved um,
Because I am the
our
savior.
children are going to feel like I don't love them. Yes, I am the savior. I am in control, and if and fear is a great way to control our kids. Telling them that there's a snake under every big tall rock is going to make them kind of worried about climbing it next time. And so it is something that will work for a period of time, but it's not something that will benefit for any period of time. And so my husband, he has an ability to be very calm and very rational in the middle of when I was so fearful and learning to let go of my kids. And I had a hard time also finding other parenting resources that were saying it's okay for you to allow your kids to experience the full realm of what the world has to offer. You don't have to cushion and hide and protect them from everything that comes their way, because they will have to deal with it eventually. And the honest truth is, when they're little, there is such a small risk associated with the experience because they do live right next to you, under your roof, in your care. Then, if they were to wait until they're teenagers experiencing those risks, the consequences triple, double. Like it's a lot more. So I've learned that the younger we can introduce our kids to problem solving skills, tools to address things that are scary for them, and then having experiences of overcoming, then it becomes a part of who they are instead of something you have to backtrack and try to input later, when it's already so ingrained. And it's very hard to do that.
Absolutely. Let's get a break here, Lexi. But when we come back, I want to talk about the correlation of what parents should understand about fear and how we don't transfer our fears onto our children. The book is entitled, What Do You Say to a Dragon? A story about facing fear and anxiety. Stay on point. We're back right after this.
My husband and I have had our own personal journey with our marriage. We almost divorced right after we had our first daughter. And a lot of it was actually differences that we saw life in general. But a lot of it was my fear around his difference of opinion than me. And I thought that if he was to pull our kids into things that are pushing them to grow and learn, that it meant he didn't love well like I did. So we've been married. On Wednesday, it will be 9 years. But the process that we had to go through as a couple to understand where the other one was coming from, to trust where the other one was coming from, and then to know that I was not the one who loved well and he was the one who did not love well. I had to fully come a 180 of being like, oh, just because you do this differently and you're pulling our kids into something that I feel uncomfortable with because of my own past, that doesn't mean that your love is less. It means that your love is different and it is expanding in an area where I would be restricting. So
Wow.
we've gone through a lot
How do you
together.
have that moment of reckoning with yourself to say that this is a problem and it's a problem that I am projecting? It may not seem like a problem today, but in the long run, I don't, and a lot of parents have this. We want to cushion every fall, every failure, every shortcoming. And when they become old enough, they have no problem solving skills because we have helicoptered in to fix everything. So when do you have that reckoning with self?
Honestly, it's really hard to do. It's hard to acknowledge that you're the one inhibiting your kids from extending themselves into what it is that not only they want, but what they need. And so for me, it took a while for me to watch my daughter go into an experience that was scary for her, watch her have the experience of crying or being mad at us for pushing her, and then watching her come out on the other side and saying, like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I did that. And she
Mm-hmm.
had that moment many times. And the more that she did, and the more she could draw from the experience of those moments, the more that I saw my perception of what I was protecting her from was actually inhibiting her. It was not helping her.
Mm-hmm.
And so it took for me uh, just committing to allowing the um, broadness of life for
Mm-hmm.
her to experience.
Now, as you're
And
watching her, are you also having to watch yourself and your
oh
own
yeah,
heart?
absolutely. Well, because it's you don't understand until you have your children how much you want to do everything for them. You want to give them everything that they could ever want and need, and it doesn't work that way. They have their own they have their own coding of who they are individually. They have their own hurdles that they have to climb. They have their own fears and things that don't scare them that may be different from yours. There's such a variety, and it is so much harder when you actually have your own than just internalizing like, oh, it will be easy to do this when I have kids. You actually have to let go, and
Mm-hmm.
it starts way earlier than you would necessarily want to.
Mm-hmm.
But it is incredible to watch the amount of joy and excitement for her as she comes into her own power at such a young age,
Mm-hmm.
instead of um, me telling her she has power, but not allowing her to step into it at all.
Mm-hmm. And so, do you have a conversation at some point when you become a mother with your parents or with your mother, especially about the way that you have internalized your own fear?
Yeah. Yes, because there are going to be some of those things that naturally are within the conversation. Even as I've had very direct conversations with my parents about certain things we don't want talked about with our kids. If there's something that they're worried about that makes them afraid, for how we are introduced. So we live on a farm. We just moved to 23 acres. We have a ton of animals, and we have a lot of land and space for our kids. That's something we've decided is one way we want to help develop our children in this way
Mm-hmm.
of being independent, being confident, of hard work, being responsibility, all that stuff. And so there's a lot of stuff that feels out of control for my parents.
And
And
does it feel out of
it
control for
has
you too, though?
at times, but really the amount of teaching. So that's another thing that I feel like is missing. If we have our children with other people for most of the day, they have to learn from someone.
Right.
In the very beginning, if you put the time in of teaching them how to do things properly, you will feel a lot less anxious when they go out to do something that's new, because you know that you've instilled tools, you've instilled common sense, you've actually told them the truth of what could happen, but you haven't told them an exaggeration of what can happen.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are actually proactively teaching and guiding and helping your kids to understand that the world is a very large and dangerous place if you don't know how to approach it. But if you actually have the tools to approach it properly, it can be a dangerously adventurous place where if you step into it and you are aware and curious, especially, that there's so much you can get out of it. And
Mm-hmm.
there's so much that you can bring other people into. And that's one of the things that has been fun for my parents to watch is they come and my daughter climbs on the ATV and she's like riding my mom around, showing her the animals, telling her how she takes care of them and her chores that she has. And that experience for her is going to shape and develop how she sees herself way more than if I had just told her, like, oh, yeah, you are very brave and you are very confident and you can take care of things. If I never showed her that she's actually
Mm-hmm.
very, very capable of doing that. So
Mm-hmm. How did your
it's
mom
a
how
very
did your
tangible.
mom receive the conversation of you saying, okay, there are certain things that we realize are hindrances that we don't want you to make that impartation into their lives? How did they receive that?
I think because of the way that I have always functioned, my parents kind of understand that I kind of march to the beat of my own drum a little bit. I like to make new ways, and I'm always questioning things of why we do what we do. And oh, it's just because everyone does it. Like, that's how we keep our kids safe, or that's how we explain to our kids this or that. And when it's an always statement, I'm suspicious. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
no, but why is that? So
Mm-hmm.
they're used to that. And then my husband is also um, very unique in how he experiences the world. So the dynamic of that together has created a relationship between me and my husband and my parents where they have been very open and helpful when we've asked them to enter into a situation with our kids. If you're not going to be able to feel like you can encourage them, then just wait where they can't see you until you can. Like,
Mm-hmm.
those are things that they are very, very receptive to. And they've also seen how much our kids are growing out here and thriving in an environment where they're not constantly watched. And I think that's a big thing. Kids right now are constantly watched and
Mm-hmm. And
corrected.
constantly
And
watching tablets and
yes,
social media and television. And so now they're watching the world and they're watching their environment and animals and plants and they're watching things grow and progress.
yep. And they're experiencing the actual pains of, I stepped on that. Uh, there was a stinging nettle bush in the backyard, and I kept telling my 3-year-old son, "This stings you if you touch it." Well, he continually touched it. Man, he got these little welts on his hand. He would come crying to me, and I'd say, "Honey, you got to stop touching the stinging nettle. It hurts when you touch it."
Mm-hmm.
But I can't stand there and slap his hand away every time he's going to touch the stinging nettle. Like, he has to experience in order to grow. And if we are sitting and it is a completely different experience if you're sitting and watching something and you're learning about stinging nettle and saying, like, oh, it's a plant, than if you're touching the stinging nettle and it's stinging you over and over again. And you have to, and then you realize, I should stop touching this because it hurts. And that's what he did. It took him like 3 times and then he stopped touching the stinging nettle.
Wow.
But if we don't have that
Right.
experience, where is it going to come from? You know?
Mm-hmm. His brain is now able to process that like touching a hot stove,
Yes,
in his
exactly.
own way and having his own understanding of this stinging nettle is going to sting me if I continue to touch it.
Hmm. Yeah, and that is one of the hard things of there. I have experienced a lot of messaging that if you let them touch the hot stove in the first place, then you haven't done your job properly. Um, and and so the way that I've watched parents kind of figure out how to get around that is to create what I was saying earlier, creating fear that's unnecessary to keep their kids from doing what it is that they are not wanting them to do. So saying like, oh, if you touch that, then it's going to scald your hand. I'm going to have to take you to the emergency room. You probably won't, like creating a scenario that's so large and over produced that you keep your kids, then you actually are creating something that not only keeps them from doing what it is that you want them to do, not always, because some kids are so stubborn, but a lot of kids will just cower and they will never want to engage with the stove. But what happens when you want to teach them how to cook?
Right.
And then all of a sudden the stove is safe. So
we're sending them a mixed message.
Remember that.
We're sending them a mixed message. Let's take a break here, Lexi, but when we come back, I want to talk about the book and why it was important to help your kids through their fears at night. Stay on point. We're back with more right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. Our guest this morning is Lexi Peck, and we're talking about how parents deal with fear, how we can transfer that fear if we're not careful onto our kids, but rather than doing that, really helping our kids to face their fears and move through it. And it's really a natural progression, isn't it, Lexi? If you really think about it, removing your own fear and not really transferring that onto kids so that they're so fearful about everything that they never really step out of their bubble because the fear that really we've transferred.
Yep, exactly. Yes, and the experiences that we give our kids will enable that. Either we're expressing a love for life and excitement and curiosity for life, or we're presenting an inhibition towards life that says everything you should be wary and careful and fearful. And if you just stay inside of these four walls, you will be safe. But as soon as you step out there, there could be someone doing this to you or that to you, or there could, there's so many ways that we interact. We use our words. We don't even realize. And so an awareness as a parent is massive when it comes to how we introduce the world to our small children. And is that actually what we're wanting? Or is it something that we feel like we need to do because we've been told that's how we do it well? Being curious is where I've found the key to entering into my kids' fear.
What I love about this conversation and the ideology of understanding fear is we've got to understand our own fears, and we've got to realize not just fear, but anything that we pass on to our children. Is it serving them? Did it serve us? And in order for you to get here, what do you say to a dragon with your kids? You had to realize first that the problem is me. And for most mothers, I don't know about dads because I'm not a dad, I'm a mom, but for most mothers, it's almost a self-condemnation of I'm the problem. And so for a lot of us, we don't ever get there because we don't ever really want to own I'm the problem.
Absolutely. Yep. So the book is a manifestation of an experience with my own kids, my own daughter. And I realized that it appeared with her nightmares when she was feeling out of control and like she was not doing anything throughout her day that was extending herself into more of her courage or more of her ability to control something or step into something bigger than her. It tended to represent itself at night. So there was a baseline of anxiety of I am not strong enough to enter into something that scares me. And she couldn't necessarily say that during the day, but it would come out in her dreams at night.
And how old was she when she started having the nightmares?
It was about 4.5.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when she could really like start explaining what she was experiencing in her dreams. And I wanted to do all the right things. I wanted to encourage her that we were there, that she was safe, that nothing was in her room, that there was. I was trying to paint a picture for her of safety. And with the dragon in particular, that nightmare, it was recurring over and over again. And so for myself, I I was kind of at a loss. I was like, this is how you're supposed to approach your children when they're afraid. You're supposed to tell them that they shouldn't be, that I am here and I will protect you and I will um, hold you close, and then you should be okay. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
should understand that. And so within my book, I am giving a new perspective of how much power comes when we allow our children to tap into what's inside of them instead of what's inside of us as adults.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to be able to extrapolate our brave because it took us years and years and years and years to cultivate it. And for some of us, we're still just as afraid as adults as we were when we were little because
Mm-hmm.
nobody taught us how to cultivate it. And so, like, for
In the
her,
book, but in the book, when she's having the dreams, you say to her, or your husband says to her, begin to talk to the dragon.
exactly.
And it seems like that is like that point in which you are saying to her, you can own the power because this is not real.
Right. Right. And that's what's interesting about the dreams, is because you can change the narrative of a dream. You cannot always change the narrative of what's happening in real life. But if you have the curiosity and the understanding of talking to something and perceiving it differently, then it can extend to a lot of areas of real life when you're out in the world and you are afraid to go talk to this person and ask for what you want because you're afraid that they're going to laugh, or they're going to think that it's dumb what you want, or they're going to say no.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just don't ask. And that's an imagination. It's not real. And so we spend so much of our creativity, because all of us are so creative. We're constantly thinking of how everything can go wrong. Um, this book, what I was hoping is that it can actually create an imagination of what could be there that we're missing, that makes sense, that's not bad, that's not as scary as we thought. Um, and that's where the curiosity comes in of, maybe this person is this way for something other than what I'm creating in my mind. And that gives room for others to have a lot more width and breadth to who they are, just like we have for ourselves. Like, when I'm having a bad day, I'm not fun to be around. Does that mean that I'm not a fun person to be around all the time? No, but there are moments when
Mm-hmm.
I'm not acting in a way that is loving or someone that you'd want to just have a conversation with. And so that happens to me, and it also can happen to you. And if I can pick that out, then I can separate fear from it and just say, oh, well, maybe you're having something that's really hard going on in your life. And it
Mm.
makes sense why you're not able to approach me the way I want to be approached, because sometimes I do that to you. And I give myself grace because I understand my situation. But if I don't know how to extend that beyond myself,
Mm-hmm.
then I'm always going to be looking at other people thinking of how it's the wrong thing instead of how maybe it's the misunderstood thing.
Wow. That is so well said. And I think we all need to take heed to that. And so when you birthed this book out of your daughter's nightmare, take us into how you decided to make it a book.
So it actually came out originally as a poem for adults.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't geared towards children at all because, like what you were saying earlier, it starts here. And
Mm-hmm.
it starts with how I perceive the world. And my children are going to watch me and how I perceive first before they know how to extend themselves into the world and then start to see it from their own eyes. And so when I watched my husband go in and talk to Vivian and say, "You have power here. It's not just about something that you can't control. So let me show you how you have power." It automatically reflected on myself of, oh my gosh,
Mm.
I do that all the time in life. I I feel a victim to what is in front of me, and I assign fear or anxiety onto it instead of responsibility of, I actually have power here. I can step into something and acknowledge where there may be something I need to grow in. I need to practice more. I need to experience. And that gives me a place to stand on. And so that's where it started. It was a poem. And then a friend of ours who he works for a speakers bureau in Nashville. He was visiting and read it, and he said, "Do you mind if I take this to a few children's publishers? Because I really see this as a children's book." And so that's kind of how the ball got rolling. He sent the poem, and then Tyndale, who ended up being interested in it, helped me to change the language into something that we could put and gear towards children.
Mm-hmm.
And the response has still stayed the same, that grandparents and parents have said to me, "I have found this book useful for me just as much as I have found it useful for my children."
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like that is what I was hoping for. I want the conversation to be one that is tangible to adults, is also tangible to kids, and for kids to see that the adults in their lives have the same problems. We just are better at hiding it.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that you engage your children with, "Oh man, I'm feeling a little bit nervous about this.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that's fear, like it creates fear for mommy, but this, I'm going to be brave and I'm going to step into it and watch, because I want you to see what it looks like when someone is afraid, but they do it anyway." And
Mm.
then I also want you to experience that for yourself. And so I'm going to help you acknowledge when there's something that you're afraid of, and I'm going to watch you as you step into your brave.
I love it. The book is so much more than a children's book. It is a teachable tool for our children, but we wanted to sort of share the backstory, because what we have in life, what we know and learn in life is what we transfer to our children. But can we see that we're transferring fear, and not just see it, but correct it in ourselves, so that we don't continue this cyclical, generational behavior that doesn't serve us or our kids. It is an incredible message, not just about the fears that our children face, but making us look at ourselves. Before we got to let you go, Lexi, tell people how they can get the book and how they can tap into any other resources that you may have available.
So the book is available at many of the large retailers. Amazon is an obvious one. It's also at Target and Walmart and Barnes and Noble online and such. I have a website that's lexiyoungpeck.com, and it has easy links across there that you can order the book from. And then I've also written a few blog posts on there about the same topic of how I have perceived my experience with fear, and then entering into parenting with that experience. And so I have an Instagram. It's also Lexi Young Peck, and that's where I'm most active. But like I said, I live on a farm. We don't have internet. We don't have TV. And so we're on the a little bit less than normal, but I interact with it as I can.
There you go. The book is What Do You Say to a Dragon? A story about facing fear and anxiety. It is beautifully illustrated, and I am using it with our own little ones who also face fears, different fears. And you know what? I want to revisit, those different kinds of fears, and hopefully the conversation will help parents and grandparents to make a shift so that our kids show up in the world and create their own experiences. It's been an incredible conversation. Lexi, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Indeed. Hey, everybody, stay on point. We're back right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the OPT Network. This is my final point, on point. today. We want to thank Lexi Peck. The book is entitled, What Do You Say to a Dragon? It's a story about facing fear and anxiety. And initially, when I looked at the children's book, because our babies face a lot of fear and a lot of anxiety, as you can well imagine, when kids come from hard places, it's not always easy to dissect fear and anxiety, because oftentimes children are not old enough to articulate what they are fearful of. But as we go through life, we see fears showing up in various parts of their lives. And so when we got this book, I thought that is God sending us what we need to deal with fear. It wasn't until I was talking to a very good friend of mine, and we were talking about how her mother's fears had been projected to she and her sister over the years. And it's not until in her 50s that she really is able to identify it. And what I love about Lexi's conversation is that she and her husband made the diagnoses early, that her fears were being projected onto their children. And if that pattern, that cycle was not broken, it would repeat itself, and it would be handed down and down and down until somebody understood that this is what we do. We cultivate fear and we pass it on. And fear and anxiety are just two of those emotions that are passed down. Now, I believe that they have their place. Fear is given to us so that we understand when we're in a situation and we need to be concerned about our safety and maybe even afraid. But it is not meant to harbor into our lives and into our psyches and prevent us from stepping out into the unknown. And if we're not careful, we'll project all of the things that are happening in the world onto our kids, and we'll try to hold them in this space, in this bubble, because we're saying, I can protect you, but I don't know what's going to happen when you go out into the world. And so subsequently, what we're doing is we're not equipping our kids to figure through situations. We are making them so uncertain about everything that they don't try anything. Now, though this book is a small book, it is a children's book, the greater meaning is so much deeper. And so I started asking myself the question during this conversation, how am I transferring things that will not serve my children? How am I transferring those things? How am I showing up with them? What am I doing? What am I showing? What am I saying to them about uncomfortable situations so that they will learn it's uncomfortable, but it's okay that I can do it even though I'm a little bit scared. And there was a case in point where we were at a hotel and we wanted to take the children down. Well, we took the children down to the swimming pool. All of the little kids around their age were in the pool, but our kids were just uncommonly afraid of the pool. Why were they afraid? Well, they're too little to really articulate why they're afraid. But what am I doing? What are we doing as parents to say to them, water can be dangerous, it can, and you should be careful. But to teach them water safety, to teach them to be able to roll over on their backs and float in case they're in the water, to teach them how to enjoy life, understanding that, yeah, there are fears in just about anything. But do we just stop doing a thing because it's scary, because we might fall off of a bicycle? Our little one, our 4-year-old, broke his leg. Right now, we're dealing with the fear of him walking on the walking boot. And so these conversations should make us all think about what fear is. We know what it is. how we internalize it, how our kids are internalizing it, and how we get through it. If we don't ever get through fearful situations, we'll never see the full manifestation of what the world has to offer. And that is my final point on point today. Stay with us. We're back to wrap up right after this.